Hey all you wonderful bookish folk, I'm Eric from Lonesome Reader and this is the first part of my May wrap-up. The year is just flying by. I'm still setting things up in my new flat here. There's still lots of books and clothes in boxes and I know it's going to be a slow process until I get my bookshelves up and everything set in place. And even though I don't like clutter and chaos, I know it's all eventually going to be okay. Especially because I got this wonderful housewarming gift from Ali Smith. Not only is Ali the most brilliant and imaginative writer, but she's also the kindest and sweetest person. For some reason, whenever we meet up, we end up talking about bizarre animals. So she sent me this clever fella as a guide for my new writing room, and I just love him. He's called Chlamyphorus truncatus, so you'd get some funny looks if you took this guy walking in the park, wouldn't you? Last week I got to go to the awards ceremony for the British Book Awards, or as it's sometimes called, the Nibbies. And oh my gosh, this is like the Oscars of the book world. I had no idea dusty bookish people could brush up so well. It felt like there were 1,000 people there, all in black tie. I wore my tux, but I got the bus there instead of a fancy car because that's the kind of classy guy I am. I have to say I was really nervous about going to this. Generally, I don't like big fancy parties and fancy clothes. If I could have it my way, I would spend 99% of my life in jeans and t-shirts, just relaxing and reading alone or talking to one or two thoughtful people. But of course, sometimes dressing up can be fun. I also felt like a bit of a fraud because I'm just a passionate reader and this is more like an industry event and I don't actually work in the book industry. I was just kindly asked to be a judge. But once I got there and had a few glasses of wine, it was all okay. I had a lovely time chatting with people in the book industry, like my buddy Tasha, who's always good fun, and Emma, who works for a publisher but is also a booktuber. And yes, there was a fancy dress photo booth. But I also got to see the wonderful bookseller Bob, who owns and runs the Gutter Bookshop in Dublin. And at the Nibbies, the first award was for the best independent bookshop, and Bob actually won that, so it was really exciting. If you're ever in Dublin, be sure to visit his shop, the Gutter Bookshop. I'll put a link below. And I also had a few drinks and a good chat with the smashing writer and journalist Damien Barr, who was looking very dapper in his kilt. Garth Greenwell's amazing novel, What Belongs to You, won the best debut book of the year. But it was also fantastic seeing Sarah Perry's acceptance speech for Novel of the Year, and it won the best overall book of the year. The Essex Serpent is such a wonderful novel, and I was so glad that we chose it to win in our category. You can watch part of her speech right here.
To the Essex Serpent. Overall Book of the Year award, ladies and gentlemen. The Essex Serpent, Sarah Perry, and The Serpent's Tail.
Inherited me. And for a long time, Hannah was the only person in the whole publishing industry that believed that there was something in my strange debut novel, what feels like about a decade ago, but it was only about 3 years. And now we're here, so I've insisted that she comes up, and I'm just incredibly grateful to have my name listed amongst these writers that I've admired for years, and good friends of mine, and to be holding another murder weapon.
I'm sure there's not very much time for me to say very much more, but I'm just going to say a huge thank you and an incredible thank you to everyone at Profile and Serpent's Tail who have made this journey not just kind of an amazing masterclass in how it's done, but just such a pleasure, I think, for all of us. It's been such fun and such a wonderful journey, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both.
So I was really happy to see that result and know that I was a small part of the judging process. Of course, I had very strong feelings about another book on the shortlist, Sebastian Barry's Days Without End, and I made a whole video talking about that, so I'll put a link to that if you haven't watched that and if you're interested in my strong thoughts about that. I said in that video how I've sent a copy of Days Without End to Richard, who left a comment in my giveaway video about the shortlist for the British Book Awards. But of course, I want to send a copy of the actual winner, the Essex Serpent, to someone in that video as well. So through my random selection process, I've selected the winner as Fatma S, who describes herself as a feminist reader. So Fatma, please email me or message me your address and I'll send you a copy of the Essex Serpent. And if you get a chance, please let me know what you think about it once you've read it. Enough of the preamble now and on to what I've actually been reading. So I feel like my reading habits have been sort of messed up with the whole move happening, but I've still read 4 books in the past 2 weeks or so. So first, I finally finished reading Dear Friend, From My Life I Write to You in Your Life by Yiyun Lee. This is published by Hamish Hamilton. I've been reading this on and off for a couple of months, but I really got swept into it in the past couple of weeks. This is a collection of memoirist essays reflecting on a life spent reading and writing. It's sort of fascinating how incredibly personal it is, but also really impersonal at the same time, because she spends a lot of time discussing writers like Elizabeth Bowen and Nabokov, Ivan Turgenev, Virginia Woolf, Catherine Mansfield, and William Trevor, who is a writer that she actually befriended. But she also mentions throughout 2 different periods she spent in hospital, her suicide attempts, and her thoughts around suicide. Part of what I love about this book are all her contradictory and unsettled feelings that she has surrounding life, the process of reading, and the relationship between author and reader. Reading is such an intensely private and personal thing, but it's sort of mysterious, you know, how it allows us to feel closely connected to the author, yet we don't really know them at all. Also, she explores so meaningfully a subject that I keep coming back to, which is the condition of loneliness and aloneness, and the distinction between those two things, and how she believes that if aloneness is inevitable, I want to believe that aloneness is what I have desired, because it is happiness itself. I think there's so much meaning wrapped up in that statement. It's sufficient to say that this book touched me deeply, and it's absolutely one of my favorite books of the year. And look at this cover, it's a beauty, isn't it? Next I read Can You Hear Me by Elena Varvello. This is a very different book from the last. It's not actually published yet. It's going to be published around mid-July by Two Roads, who also are publishing Jen Campbell's next book. Elena Varvello is an Italian writer, and this is her first novel to be translated into English. It's basically a psychological suspense book, but it feels like so much more. It's written from the point of view of a man named Elia, who is reflecting back to his time in 1978 when he was a teenager and how his family fell apart one summer due to his father's very sinister actions. This isn't a plot spoiler because alongside his narrative you get the story of how his father kidnapped a girl and took her into the woods one evening. It's about how Elia deals with his father's monstrous actions as well as his own emotional and sexual development during that summer. And it also involves issues of the economic depression in this small Italian town during that time. It's creepy and intense and powerfully written, and it's definitely one to watch out for. The Good Immigrant, edited by Nikesh, Shukla. This is published by Unbound. It was first published towards the end of last year, and it's only just come out in paperback now. It sort of has an interesting development because Unbound is sort of like a crowdsourced funding for their books that they published. So readers put up money to get this book published, including J.K. Rowling. These are personal essays written by BAME authors, which, if you don't know, stands for Black, Asian, and Ethnic Minority, about their experiences of being made to feel like an outsider within their own country. Although these authors are British, their thoughts about identity and race could easily be applied to America as well. Some of these essays are more academic, and some of them are more proactively political, and some of them are very strictly autobiographical, but they all come from a place of strong personal feeling, and that really comes through. I got the sense of reading these that they were really coming from places of the heart. This internal and external sense of conflict, of feeling like a foreigner within their own country, is what these writers have had to deal with every day of their lives. It's about the self-consciousness of being the only black person in the room when a Kanye West song comes on. It's about the feelings of sexual expectation being an Asian woman in Britain. It's about training for years to be an actress, only to be cast as the terrorist's wife in a production. It's about non-white children who feel that the only stories that they can read and write need to be about white protagonists. It's about the very famous and gorgeous actor Riz Ahmed, who is still subjected to really intrusive searches and cross-examinations every time he flies for an acting job or audition. It's about race, class, language, and power. And that's what makes it such a gripping and powerful read. This is another one of my top books of the year. And finally, I read Flesh and Bone and Water by Luiza Sauma, and this is published by Viking. This is the story of a Brazilian man named Andre who left Brazil when he was a teenager and moved to Britain, where he's spent almost his entire life. So he's an old man, and he receives a letter from a woman named Luiza, who was his maid when he was growing up in a fairly privileged and well-to-do white family, and he reflects back to the trauma of what happened in his teenage years, his relationship with Luana, and why it all fell apart. So this is one of those books where I was enjoying reading it. It is all like well written, but I got to like halfway through and I was just sort of like, I don't really know if I see the point of this book or if it's going anywhere special. But then it got to this big twist, and then I was like wholly invested in just like, wow. So I like it when a book can kind of grip you like that. Although there's a slight sense of struggle where you sort of wonder around that like midpoint of like, well, should I continue on with this or should I DNF it? But I enjoyed this story of the secrets families can keep and the cultural differences between Brazil and Britain. The class structure in Brazil, how there was like a very definite class structure, like particularly at the time when he was thinking back to when he was a teenager. There were aspects of it which I wish had been developed more, like Andre's father. He was a plastic surgeon, but then also in his spare time, he performed abortions undercover because it was illegal. And so I would have liked to know more about that struggle, like particularly reading Joyce Carol Oates' novel, A Book of American Martyrs, and that whole issue of abortion. But I can see why she sort of steered clear of that, because it would have made it a very different sort of novel, and she was really just focusing on the romance and relationship between these two people and why it collapsed and so disastrously. But overall, this was a very enjoyable and well-written novel. So that's what I've been reading and doing. As always, I'll post links below, and if you click show more, you can find links to my full reviews of all these books. If you've read any of them or you're interested in reading them, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, everyone, and happy reading.